Hey guys, welcome to today's Java tutorial. I know a lot of you had a lot of difficulty today trying to get the programs to work, so I'm going to upload this video this evening and I'll hopefully have all of the other ones done at the weekend some stage. I might have one or two up tomorrow or something like that, but hopefully have them all up at the weekend. So let's start with the first one. So this is exercise 1 from week 3, multiple strings. So given a string s and a non-negative int n, return a larger string that n copies of the original string. So write a Java program called MultipleStrings that prompts the user to enter two values. The first value is a string, which you will call s, and the second value is an integer, which you will call n. Generate a larger string that consists of n copies of the original string. Print out the larger string. Okay, so this one's actually easy. It just sounds very complicated. So the first thing we need to do again is get the user input. Then what we need to do is, well, once we have the two different variables that they're going to enter, which will be the string that they enter and the number of times that they want to add it on, which will be called n. Then what we need to do is we need to use a loop to print out multiple times. Okay, so it really depends which type of loop we want to use. In the example, in the solutions, I think a for loop is used, but I used a while loop instead. You could use either or. For loops are good if you know how many times you want the string to iterate. Now, in this case we do, but because the example's on Moodle, I'm going to use a while loop instead. So you just can see the difference. So the first thing we need to do is import our scanner. Or, well, we already have the scanner import, we're just going to declare equals new scanner system.in. Okay, now we need to ask the user, prompt the user to enter in a string. Enter a string. Okay. Now we need to assign their string to the variable s. String s equals my input dot next line. Okay, so now we have the string assigned. So whatever they enter will be assigned to the variable s. Okay, so now we need the integer that they will enter. So we'll prompt them again to enter in an integer. Okay, and then we'll assign the integer n, which is what we're asked to call up here, to whatever they enter. Next int. Okay, so now that we have those two variables, we now need to do create our while loop. So how do we make a while loop? Well, let's just go in here. Close this. Okay, so a while loop. How does a while loop work? Well, a while loop basically will execute any code in here in between your curly brackets while the condition is true. Okay, so if I was to say, if I had a variable called I and gave it a value of 1, and I said I is less than or equal to 2, while I is less than or equal to 2, do this. So while 1 is less than or equal to 2, it will print out runs I times. Now I here will say 1 the first time, and then it comes down here and it says I plus plus, which is basically the same thing as saying I equals I plus 1, but it's just a shorter programming way of saying add 1 onto I. So why do we do that? Well, if we didn't add 1 onto I, then I would always be equal to 1, and then it would just continuously print out the same thing. So we add 1 onto I in order to make the program continue on the right path. So the first time it will run, it will come down and say, well, runs 1 times, because I equals 1, and then it will add 1 onto I, so I now becomes 2, and it will come back up here and it will say, well, 2 is less than or equal to, because it is equal to 2, so it will run again, and it will say system.out, it will say runs 2 times, and it will print that out to the screen, and then it will add 1 to I again, but this time I is equal to 3, and it's not less than or equal to 2, so it won't execute any statements again, because this time the condition is false. So it's only when the condition is true that it'll run through. So here's an example of what's output to the screen. So the first time it runs through and it says runs 1 times, and the second time it says runs 2 times, because instead of I here, it now says 1 and 2, because that was the value of I. So let's go ahead and put our while loop into our program. So the first thing we need to do is we need to say, okay, well, we need to give create a variable called I, and we need to give it a value of 1, and this is going to break our condition, so it's not always true. So then we're going to say while what's up with the indentation? Okay, so while I is less than or equal to n is what the user entered, remember, so they entered the integer. So while I is less than or equal to n, we want to print out the string, which is s, and I just put in 2 brackets and a space in between, just so we get a space between the words. So if I run this, the problem we'd have is we'd have an infinite loop, because we've never actually made the condition false. So the condition will always be true because we haven't added 1 more onto I. So just to run through it again, I is assigned a value of 1, so while I is less than or equal to n, which is what the user entered, it will print this statement. So in order for us to break the while loop, we need to say, well, we don't want it to run forever, so we're just going to add 1 onto I every time the loop runs, so that it'll eventually break once it hits the number of times that the user entered. So let's say the user entered 2, the first time it would come down and it would say, right, well, I is equal to 1. Okay, so 1 is less than or equal to n, so 1 is less than or equal to 2, and then it would print out our string and a space, and then it would say, well, I is equal to 1, so we'll add 1 more onto that, and now I is equal to 2. So then it comes back up to the top of our while loop, and it says, so 2 is less than or equal to n, which is also 2, so 2 is less than or equal to 2, because they're equals to each other. So we'll print out our string again, and then it'll come down and say, well, I is now equal to 3. So it comes back up to the top of the loop and it says, well, 3 is not equal to, is not less than or equal to 2, so we'll end the while loop. So let's save, run our program, no errors, enter a string, so we'll just say by, enter an integer, we'll just say 2 because that's the example I used, so it says bye bye. If we run it again, enter a string, so we'll say hello, enter an integer, and I'm going to say 5, and it prints it out 5 times. Okay guys, I hope this was helpful. Again, like I said, I'll try to put up most of the exercises that were done today, so I'll try to have all of them up by the weekend at some stage. Okay, thanks, hope these were helpful.